Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. All right, so breaking news, giant news here. Myles Garrett just released a statement saying that he is requesting a trade formally from the Cleveland Browns. Now, this is news that comes as a surprise. There was a little bit of this during the season, right? At the end of the year, Myles was upset about where the team was and, if they would be headed towards the right direction in the future and how he didn't want to rebuild. From all accounts, it seems like they met, Myles and Andrew Berry met, and Myles and the team met, and things were fine. Right? Nobody thought a trade request was coming. And then we get to today. So something happened between then and now that got Myles to want to request this trade from Cleveland. Now, we'll read the statement and then we'll talk about if this is going to be a trade request that's going to be fulfilled or not, and what this means for the future of the Cleveland Browns, because it's a huge move. I mean, Myles Garrett's a franchise player and he's requesting a trade. That's not good. Let's read the statement. As a kid dreaming of the NFL, all I focused on was the ultimate goal of winning a Super Bowl. And that goal fuels me more than ever. My love for the community of Northeast Ohio, the incredible fan base of the Cleveland Browns, has made this one of the toughest decisions of my life. The past 8 years have shaped me into the man that I am today. While I loved calling this city my home, my desire to win and compete on the biggest stage won't allow me to be complacent. The goal was never to go from from Cleveland to Canton. It's always been to compete and win a Super Bowl. With that in mind, I have requested a trade from the Cleveland Browns. So basically, in that statement, he's saying he does not have faith in the Cleveland Browns organization to build a Super Bowl contender. I mean, there's no other way to read that, right? Like, he's requesting a trade because his goal is to win a Super Bowl. He does not feel like the Browns are going to be a Super Bowl contender. I mean, this is a very damaging blow for Andrew Berry, for Kevin Stefanski. I mean, for the entire Browns organization. This is a damaging blow that one of your top players has publicly stated that he feels this way about where things are going with the team. And how you handle this will really determine how all the other star players on your team feel about this. And yeah, it's not a situation you want it to be at, right? We can blame the Deshaun Watson trade, which obviously plays a heavy role into how this season went. Deshaun Watson was really, really bad this year. We can blame how the end of the season went. This is also another reason why I never advocate for tanking and losing as much as possible, just to secure draft positioning, even though you might feel like once you're out the playoffs, it doesn't matter how many games you win. This is the shit and why it matters how many games you win, right? Now, the Browns had the second overall pick. That is good, but you might have sacrificed your relationship with your best player in order to get that second overall pick, because maybe he doesn't feel this way if the team wins 7 games instead of 3. Maybe he just feels like it was a down year. But now you've gotten him to the point where he's requesting a trade. This is why winning is important, even if you're not going to make it to the championship game or to the playoffs, because you got to manage how some of the best players on your team feel about being here. And when you go 3 wins, nobody's going to feel great about being here. So Myles requests this trade. I mean, from his perspective, he's lived through 0-16. He's lived through what? Well, did he go through 1-15? No, he didn't go through one. We had to go 1-15 to get him. But he's lived through 0-16. He saw the Browns go through 1-15, and he just went through 3-13. He doesn't want to go through that again, and he's requesting a trade. Now, here comes the question that I think a lot of people are going to debate. Do the Browns fulfill this request? If you listen to Andrew Berry last week at the Senior Bowl, he said, we are not trading Myles Garrett. So that kind of answers it right there. And that answer takes on a different context now that we know that the trade request from Myles was a bit more of a serious thing than maybe some people, including myself, anticipated. Look, I'm shocked by this. I did not think Myles would be requesting a trade. But Andrew said we're not going to trade Myles. And the Browns, under this regime, have had a history of not really trading players once the request is put in, right? David Njoku requested a trade. Browns pretty much refused to move him, work something out, signed him to an extension. Everything was all good. Even with Baker, once he requested that trade, they waited till like June to trade him when he was on the roster requesting that trade in like February. So who knows, right? I don't think the Browns will be eager to trade Myles Garrett. I'll put it like that. I think this is going to go and be a Brandon Ayuk type of situation where this is going to go on for a while here. And the reason I think that's the case is simple. There's just no trade out there that's going to be even close to getting fair value for Myles Garrett. You can only trade up to 3 first-round picks, right? And if you trade Myles Garrett to a contender, you have to assume that team's going to be in the conference championship game, in the Super Bowl, in the divisional round. So you're talking about a late first-round pick. You're not going to trade Myles Garrett for what might be three late first-round picks. You're just not going to do it. Even if you feel like you have to do it, you're not going to want to do that, right? Like if Detroit wants to trade for Myles Garrett, Detroit does not have the picks that I would let go of Myles Garrett on, right? This is kind of like when Kobe requested the trade from the Lakers or any other time that a franchise player has requested a trade. If you're the Browns, it benefits you the most to work through the awkwardness. Now, this shit's going to be awkward. Like, it's going to be awkward with the fans. It's going to be awkward with the players. It's going to be awkward between Andrew Berry and Myles Garrett. That relationship's never going to be the same. This shit is going to be awkward. But you got to work through it if you want the best case scenario for the Cleveland Browns. Because trading Myles is just not best case scenario. It's worst case scenario. You got to trade a player like Myles Garrett, then what's stopping somebody like Denzel Ward from wanting to go? Right? Or, maybe Nick Chubb doesn't want to resign here. Or, you just start losing all the players that you're counting on to be able to bounce back quickly. So they're just going to have to wade through this awkwardness and try to work this out with Myles. Maybe they can make a move at quarterback that he's a bit more confident in, and rebuild that trust between him and the organization, because right now it's not there. You just put it on paper that it's not there. This is the leader of your team. This is the leader of your locker room that's not trusting where you're at. I mean, that's bad. Like if you're asking, hey, what could happen in the middle of February when the Browns basically made the decision to keep Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski that could make me feel like they could get fired in the middle of the offseason, this is it. This is one of them, right? Because if you cannot work this out with him, even if you have to trade Myles, you have to address the fact that the best player on your team for the last 7 years, 8 years, did not want to be here because he specifically did not believe in the dude running the show. Right? And that includes Kevin and Andrew. And what's that going to do to this locker room's ability to believe in these guys going forward? I mean, that's just a real conversation you unfortunately now have to have. Again, maybe you work this out. Maybe you talk this out with them. But yeah, I didn't think it would get to this point. I really thought that they had figured this out. And all reports and everything I was hearing was telling me that this was figured out. But for it to get to this point publicly, I mean, this has consequences. There's not a good way to flip this, right? Like Myles requesting a trade is a horrible thing, especially publicly. It's not a good thing for the Cleveland Browns. What this is going to do is put pressure on the Cleveland Browns to try to make something happen at quarterback, I would imagine, right? So if you're the Seattle Seahawks, the Browns are probably going to be very aggressive to try to get Geno Smith from you. They're probably going to be very aggressive to get any quarterback that they feel like can give them a chance to win a Super Bowl. I don't feel great about that being a thing that's swaying over this organization, but I have to look at the reality, right? They're not going to convince Myles Garrett to come back if they don't do anything, right? Like, you got to do something at the quarterback position. None of these quarterbacks at the top of the draft are that, in my opinion, or even close to that. So I'd imagine that you'd have to do something aggressive in the free agent or trade market to get somebody here that Myles feels a lot better, and to build that faith back in with him in the organization, so he feels more comfortable being here. Because I don't imagine that the Browns are going to be eager to trade him. Like, if the Browns do trade him, this is probably going to happen late in the offseason, because there's just nothing motivating them, the Browns, to make this trade. All the motivation lies in the Browns trying to wade through the awkwardness and figure this out. I can't think of a trade package that would be worth it for Myles Garrett. All right, so if we look at like different ways this can roll out, depending on the result of this trade request. If you have to trade Myles Garrett, then you might as well strip it all down and rebuild. Now, you have to make the decision right now, because this is happening under Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski's watch. Do you keep those two? I'm sure the comment section will be full of people saying you got to fire them, right? But internally, the Browns have to make that decision, because if you decide to rebuild, you want to stick with something, right, after you make that decision to rebuild. So if you have to trade Myles, like if this comes to a situation where you can't meet, Myles is saying he's going to sit out a year of football rather than play for the Browns, and it gets that ugly, and you got to make a move and you got to trade Myles Garrett, okay, you might as well trade Denzel Ward too, and just start a full-on, stripped-down rebuild this next offseason. It's not what anybody wants. It's absolutely 1,000% not what I want. But that would be your option there, right? Once you have to trade Myles Garrett, this whole illusion about winning right now, or your ability to win 10 games, it just drops significantly. He's that important of a player. Myles Garrett's one of the best defensive players of his era. So you're probably just going to have to strip it all down, right, and move on from pretty much everything that exists right now in Berea. Trade Denzel, just move on with the whole team, right? Everybody's going to be gone. You're going to restart, and you're going to try to probably get a top 5 pick next year to solve your quarterback answer questions. And that's just going to be where you're going to be. You can work this thing out, and again, best case scenario for the Browns, you work this thing out, because again, even if you do bring Myles back, you got to get him to a point to where he doesn't feel like he can't win a championship here, because he's one of the leaders of the team. So I'm thinking that means that you have to make a big trade at quarterback. I don't love this, because making a big trade at quarterback is exactly how we got in this position to begin with, right? And my guess would be Matt Stafford would be somebody you can maybe have that hope with. I don't know how Myles feels about Kyler Murray, but it might be Kyler Murray, right? They're both guys who spent time at Texas A&M together. If you trade for Kyler Murray, maybe that's something that gets him excited. Kyler's kind of at the tail end of his run in Arizona, still under 30. Like, maybe those are the two moves you can make that dramatically changes how everybody feels about the quarterback position here and the Browns' ability to win a Super Bowl. And that keeps Myles here. Basically, what I'm saying is that the Browns want to keep Myles here, right? This is not going to be as simple as just like ignoring the trade request and hoping he comes to his senses. This is a little bit more significant, right? Like, I've talked about the David Njoku situation being a situation where the Browns got a player with a trade request and were able to make things okay. This is more like Kobe, right? Where the Lakers had to do something to keep Kobe Bryant, right? They had to get Powell. They had to get a pretty good trade. And that's the question here for the Browns is, what move can you make in trades and free agency to make Myles feel a lot better about his situation in Cleveland? That's what has to happen. There's also a question of, hey, one of your leaders of the team basically put out a statement saying that he doesn't believe in the organization. One, we've talked about that aspect. But, like, I can't imagine if you're another player on the Cleveland Browns, this makes you feel great about how Myles feels about you. So this is going to be awkward. It's going to be super awkward. If you want to keep Myles, it's going to be super awkward. And it's going to take all offseason, and it's going to be a talking point and a conversation point like Brandon Ayuk was last year. Like, there's no getting around that part of it. But if you do want to keep Myles, you have to start thinking about moves you can make that would make Myles want to stay. Now, there's a consequence to that, because making a big flashy move is arguably how you put yourself in the position that you were to go 3-14 this year with Deshaun Watson. We talked about that earlier. Browns are in a tricky spot, man. Like, this is a tricky spot because you don't want to trade Myles Garrett, but in order to retain him, you probably got to make a move. And what move is there to be made? Right? Like, you're not going to change Myles' mind by trading for a wide receiver. You're going to change Myles' mind by trading for a quarterback. And what's that really going to cost once teams know that you kind of got to make this move or you got to trade Myles Garrett? Or is Myles Garrett involved in one of these trades to get a quarterback? Hey, man. And like, if you're asking me the ways that this can go, I have no clue. Because this can get as wild as the Browns trading Myles Garrett for like first-round picks and Kyler Murray. I don't know what's going to happen next, to be honest with you, with this and the Myles Garrett thing. I don't think it's guaranteed that the Browns trade him. I think the Browns are going to try to not trade him as long as possible. And I think the Browns are going to be willing to sit through some of this awkwardness as long as possible. I don't think they're just going to be like, hey, Myles, we'll be happy-go-lucky and we'll trade you. Because, one, they don't do that even when you can get decent value for a player if you trade them. And two, you can't get decent value from Myles Garrett. So maybe they respect this request. Maybe they don't. I lean on the side of them not wanting to do this close or immediately, especially if it's to a contending team that can't give them like a top 5 pick in the next few years. Like, that is exactly what the Browns want and can't get from this trade. It's just not worth it. So if you're a team trying to trade for Myles Garrett, you probably got to give up something significant, like a player of significance back. Here's one scenario that I could see the Browns going for, and it all depends on what the medicals are. But, like, if you traded Myles to San Francisco for, like, 3 first-round picks and Brock Purdy, I think that might be something they would go for, but that's how high the price would be. They would want to get a quarterback in return. Or something significant in return. I don't think the Browns would make a trade on that gives them pennies on the dollar. Like, the price is going to be incredibly high for Myles Garrett. They're going to want at least a Pro Bowl caliber player, 3 first-round picks, and probably something else on top of that, right? Like, probably a second and a third. just to get fair value for what is a perennial all-pro player and the best defensive player in football at the peak of his powers. Like that's what the price is going to be. This can go so many different directions. Like I honestly have no clue how this is going to go, but it can go in a million different directions. I'm not excited about this at all. This is awful news. It caught me by surprise. From all I've heard, they felt like this situation was settled. So I'm pretty sure this has caught the Cleveland Browns by surprise too. I don't know if there will be a statement that the Browns will release. We know that Andrew Berry has already gone on the record and said he's not going to trade Myles Garrett not a couple weeks ago, but as early as last week, he said this before this request comes out. We know the Browns have a history of not really respecting these trade requests. And the league has gotten a lot more strict on respecting these trade requests in general and not doing them. So we'll see what happens with this whole saga. But it's not good news for the Cleveland Browns. There's no silver lining to this. This is bad. This is your franchise player saying he doesn't feel like he can win a Super Bowl with this franchise. And again, I said this in other videos. Andrew Berry's going to have to show that he's worth his salt this offseason because this is going to be a very difficult one for him to manage. You got your franchise player wanting out. You got the number 2 overall pick in a draft class that doesn't have any quarterbacks. You have a giant hole at quarterback that you traded for that you have to fill somehow with somebody. If Andrew Berry is truly the GM that should be with the Browns and provide continuity with this team for long term, then he's got to prove it this offseason. And if he does, cool. We'll keep Myles and we'll have a good draft and we'll be a much better team next year. But if he doesn't, then everybody's going to be gone, right? Kevin, Myles, Andrew, everybody going to be gone. And that's unfortunate because this is the closest, the last, since the Kevin Stefanski era, has been the closest that the Browns have felt like to being a normal organization. And then this happens, right? They trade for Deshaun Watson. They have this trade request with Myles Garrett. And it's really unfortunate where they are. Also, before I end this video, because, I've been editing this, so I've been able to sit with it. I do think that this popping up, at least for Andrew Berry, I don't know if for Kevin Stefanski, but for Andrew Berry, feels like the beginning of the end, right? A lot of the assumption with the trade request stuff dying after the season was, hey, Myles just didn't want them to fire, the whole organization. But dropping this trade request when he dropped it, I feel like that read was wrong, right? So the future of Kevin Stefanski on this team, I don't know. Doesn't feel great for Kevin. Doesn't feel great for Andrew Berry. And especially if you do end up having to trade Myles Garrett, it's going to be something that's going to put this team in a position of where they're probably going to want to fire their head coach and GM after this offseason at the very least. There's really no scenario in which you trade Myles Garrett where I think everybody keeps their job. Like everybody gets fired at that point because that's usually what happens when you lose a guy like Myles Garrett before his contract is up. So, man, we'll see. We'll see. But this is not nothing. This puts a giant fork in the Browns offseason, like a giant fork in it. And it's definitely going to change how they operate, whether it be that they acquiesce this request and basically bring a new team in, or if they decide to make a move at head coach and GM and just fire these guys, or if they decide to double down and make a big swing at a player or quarterback they feel like could make Myles feel a lot better about being here. But Yeah, man. This is a huge fork in this offseason. There's no way around it. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.